8:14, let's pump it up. Let's go down to the man he spends all night researching. He's got great stories. You'll find it in historyouthere.com. And if you ever come up to him where he's getting around the traps like at the Ipswich Historical Society last weekend, you got to come up and go, Harold the H. Peacock. He's going to talk about a bloke called Waterloo George who passed on 140 years ago and has taken all this time for someone to research and come up with a story. Hello, Harold the H.
Yeah, good morning, Danny. And a few of the ladies did come up, and I think it was a little quiet, ark to themselves, but it was great that they're listening to us on Westmore Radio.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of people. We're building a massive audience that, we got advertising coming out of New York, Afghanistan, Fiji, Tonga. It's unbelievable. Now, we'd put the ads there, but nobody would understand what they're saying. We've even got Skype. What a load of crap. Now, Harold, you tell us about Waterloo George.
Yeah, it starts with the Battle of Waterloo that was fought in modern-day Belgium in 1815. Mm-hmm. And of course, that captivated consciousness of society ever since. It was Napoleon's last stand. Mm-hmm. The British-led victors were commanded by the Duke of Wellington, and he became an instant rock star. And you see, anyone who had anything to do with the Battle of Waterloo was seen as a celebrity. Oh. And that was certainly the case here in Queensland and in Ipswich.
So he fought in the Battle of Waterloo?
That's right, Waterloo George. Yeah, we'll come to that because there was a lot of them, but they were all treated as celebrities. You see, Captain Henry Miller in 1824, he was the first commandant of the Moreton Bay Penal Colony, and so effectively was the founder of Queensland. Captain Miller was a veteran of the Battle of Waterloo.
Wow.
Then there was Colonel Charles Grey, who in 1853 was the first police magistrate here in Ipswich. Mm. Now, he was famous for his gentleness and consideration of others. There's a Grey Street here in Ipswich. But first and foremost, Colonel Grey was another veteran of the Battle of Waterloo. And then there was Waterloo George. Oh. Now, George was christened George Winfield when he was born in Exeter in Devon in England in 1785. Mm-hmm. At the Battle of Waterloo, George lost an arm and an eye to a cannonball. Now, he did get an army pension and eventually came to Queensland in 1854 when he was already 69 years old.
Yeah, but he couldn't pick it up. He only had one arm.
No, well, we couldn't see it. But when he arrived, for some reason, his pension was stopped. And so he was handicapped by the loss of an arm and an eye, and he was forced to make a living the best way he could. Mm. And so he wandered the streets of the colony looking for work, and that's when he got the name of Waterloo George. Yeah. Now, he plied his trade travelling between Brisbane, Ipswich and Toowoomba. Yeah. And he was often arrested for vagrancy and drunkenness, as you do. Mm. Now, he was a regular before the courts in Brisbane and Toowoomba, but never in Ipswich. You see, that's probably because the compassion of that other veteran of the Battle of Waterloo, that's the police magistrate Colonel Grey, that he probably had an effect. And so Waterloo George was let be whenever he came through town. Mm. However, he did spend his fair share of time in the benevolent asylum at Dunwich on Stradbroke Island. Mm. Now, he never liked it there, and in 1877, he famously said that he'd sooner die under a gum tree than go back to the asylum.
Right.
But in 1881, Waterloo George met his own Waterloo. You see, that's when a very curious coincidence happened in the Brisbane Police Court. Two old Waterloo veterans were brought up together on a charge of drunkenness. One was Waterloo George. Right. The other was a Frenchman who fought on the other side. Oh. Now, this was 66 years almost to the day since the famous battle, but it was the first time the two men had met. Right. On this occasion, Waterloo George came off second best. You see, he was sent back to the Dunwich Asylum, where he passed away 2 years later in 1883 when he was 98 years old.
Wow.
Now, the world and the city of Ipswich continued to have a fascination with the Battle of Waterloo. You see, Ipswich's Queensland Times newspaper in 1892 reported the death of the last known survivor of Waterloo. And in 1902, it reported the 100th birthday of a woman who saw Napoleon before the battle. But Waterloo George, we shouldn't forget old Waterloo George because we looked after him when he was passing through back then. So, Danny, we should remember him now. Waterloo George should not be forgotten.
Isn't that sad that people like that are forgotten? And the Battle of Waterloo and be able to have seen Napoleon. You know, I interviewed a bloke who got third in the pole vault in the 1936 Olympic Games, and he got his medal off Adolf Hitler. And to talk to somebody that, saw and met Hitler, you go, that's a bit of a privilege. I mean, Hitler was a grub, but he was a world-famous grub. But that is a great story. You come up in Waterloo George. Where can we get to read this and absorb it more? Because people are losing an eye and a leg. And how could you go through and lift a 98 with one eye and one arm?
Well, they were made of tough stuff back then, and obviously Waterloo George was the toughest.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
They were just first aiders. What they do is put a patch over the eye and say, mate, that'll get better in a few months.
I know, but the sad part was he got his pension in the UK, but when he came to Australia, to Queensland, they stopped giving him the pension.
Yeah, it's appalling.
So that's why he had to really start walking the streets, and he became famous in his own way.
Now, why don't you find the relatives and we'll get the government onto the pension and give him a couple of million for what he missed out on all those years ago?
Well, at least give him a headstone, because he's buried over the Dunwich Asylum.
Is that right?
In an unmarked grave.
That's unreal. Where can we read about this?
Yeah, go to historyouthere.com. This will be uploaded first thing tomorrow morning.
And the Ark man, he comes up with them. Fantastic. Harold the H. Peacock has done it again on West Bremer Radio.